Hi, Colin Donahue here. I'm going to be reading from the book Strength to Love by Martin Luther King Jr., specifically from Chapter 10, which is titled, How Should a Christian View Communism? I'm going to read some passages from this chapter and give some short commentary at times as far as how what he said is extremely important and relevant to current events. So, beginning on page 97, quote, "Let me state clearly the basic premise of this sermon. Communism and Christianity are fundamentally incompatible. A true Christian cannot be a true communist, for the two philosophies are antithetical, and all the dialectics of the logicians cannot reconcile them. Why is this true? First, communism is based on a materialistic and humanistic view of life and history. According to communist theory, matter, not mind or spirit, speaks the last word in the universe. Such a philosophy is avowedly secularistic and atheistic. Under it, God is merely a figment of the imagination. Religion is a product of fear and ignorance, and the church is an invention of the rulers to control the masses. Moreover, communism, like humanism, thrives on the grand illusion that man, unaided by any divine power, can save himself and usher in a new society. Cold atheism wrapped in the garments of materialism, communism provides no place for God or Christ. At the center of the Christian faith is the affirmation that there is a God in the universe who is the ground and essence of all reality, a being of infinite love and boundless power. God is the creator, sustainer, and conserver of values. In opposition to communism's atheistic materialism, Christianity posits a theistic idealism. Reality cannot be explained by matter in motion or the push and pull of economic forces. Christianity affirms that at the heart of reality is a heart, a loving Father who works through history for the salvation of his children. Second, communism is based on ethical relativism and accepts no stable moral absolutes. So, quick comment here. As I mentioned in my previous talk, many people seem confused as to whether what's been going on with the so-called lockdown is justifiable or not. They see it as a mix of good and bad, a complicated gray area wherein we can't say it's completely bad because it may have some benefit. And I explain that this view is incorrect, and it's based on moral relativism, or as Martin Luther King says here, ethical relativism, that fails to recognize and identify certain things that are completely bad under any circumstance. Those things, again, being aggression, which is the initiation of violence, deception, which includes cheating, and belittlement. And those three can be put under the one term, abuse. Right? So abuse is never justifiable, right? And that's a moral absolute. That's a statement coming from a moral absolutist view, which is missing from most people's view and conversation and debate about what's going on, because moral relativism, ethical relativism is so dominant, and that's by design, that's by indoctrination. So, continuing on with Martin Luther King here. Right and wrong are relative to the most expedient methods for dealing with class war. Communism exploits the dreadful philosophy that the end justifies the means. It enunciates movingly the theory of a classless society, but alas, its methods for achieving this noble end are all too often ignoble. Lying, violence, murder, and torture are considered to be justifiable means to achieve the millennial end. Is this an unfair indictment? Listen to the words of Lenin, the real tactician of communist theory. Quote, "We must be ready to employ trickery, deceit, law-breaking, withholding, and concealing truth." End quote. Modern history has known many torturous nights and horror-filled days because his followers have taken the statement seriously. In contrast to the ethical relativism of communism, Christianity sets forth a system of absolute moral values and affirms that God has placed within the very structure of this universe certain moral principles that are fixed and immutable. The law of love as an imperative is the norm for all of man's actions. And a quick comment here, just in case you're not sure what Dr. King is referring to when he says the law of love. Jesus said that the greatest commandments, the law that sums up all of the teachings of the prophets and all of the morality, in Scripture, is to love God with your whole heart, mind, and soul, and with all of your strength, and to love others as you love yourself. So that is the law of love, otherwise known as the greatest commandments. The greatest commandments of Jesus, or the greatest commandments of Yeshua, the Messiah. Okay, continuing with Dr. King's writing. Furthermore, Christianity at its best refuses to live by a philosophy of ends justifying means. Destructive means cannot bring constructive ends, because the means represent the ideal in the making and the end in progress. Immoral means cannot bring moral ends, for the ends are pre-existent in the means. Comment here. In previous talks I've talked about how pretty much all of the totalitarian, tyrannical, communist, fascist, however you want to call it, all of the unjust restrictions that have been put on people throughout the world, especially in the past year, are all operating on the premise that preemptive attack is legitimate, that it's okay for us to commit aggression against you if it might prevent some harm in the future, right? So this is another form of the ends justifying the means, which is illegitimate, as Dr. King is saying here. Okay, continuing. Third, communism attributes ultimate value to the state. Man is made for the state, and not the state for man. Another quick comment. If the state is taking the role of a doctor who can prescribe preventative health care measures for you, and you cannot object or refuse those treatments or medical devices without facing some negative consequence, then you are actually being considered the property of the state. Your body is being claimed. It's a claim of ownership of your body. Right? So you are made for the state. Right? You are the property of the state. The state isn't for you, but you rather are livestock on the state's human farm. Continuing Dr. King. One may object, saying that in communist theory the state is an, quote, interim reality, end quote, which will, quote, wither away, end quote, when the classless society emerges. True, in theory, But it is also true that while it lasts, the state is the end. Man is a means to that end. Man has no inalienable rights. Comment here, as I've brought up previously, I actually have a whole talk titled, Thought Crime of the Year, and that thought crime being that you have inalienable rights, that you have rights which cannot be taken away just because someone thinks it's a good idea to do so, just because someone says it's for the greater good, or that it's, these are the means that we need to carry out to achieve this utopic end, to achieve this end to the crisis, right? So, inalienable rights, as I previously stated in a previous talk, the most fundamental right, we can say, is the right to not be abused. And that is in any circumstance. It doesn't matter if there's a war going on. It doesn't matter if there's a natural disaster. It doesn't matter if there's a sickness. Under any circumstance, abuse is not justifiable. Abuse does not improve any situation. And those that are claiming it does are following this communist doctrine of the end justifies the means, right? Or, the individual may have to be sacrificed for the greater good, right? And of course, this is whatever they say is the appropriate sacrifice, right? Or whatever they say is the necessary form of abuse. For example, claiming ownership of your body, mandating medical devices and treatment as if they are your perfect angelic overlord and doctor and master from now until the end of time. It's just ridiculous that people don't recognize that what Dr. King is saying here is a universal and timeless truth. The ends don't justify the means, and that there are certain moral principles that are fixed and immutable. Okay. Continuing on, quote, his only rights are derived from and conferred by the state. Under such a system, the fountain of freedom runs dry. I'll repeat that, given it is to current events. The fountain of freedom runs dry under such a system. Okay, continuing. Restricted are man's liberties of press and assembly, his freedom to vote, and his freedom to listen and to read. Art, religion, education, music, and science come under the gripping yoke of governmental control. Comment here. I emphasize the word science because that's been the main vehicle for the current wave of global communism. This medical tyranny is all supposedly in the name of science, right? The science that they say is accurate, right? Whatever numbers that they give us of supposed deaths caused by a certain virus, we have to just accept as true. And whatever treatments they say are perfectly safe and best, we just have to accept as true, right? If they propose a certain chemical concoction being injected in your body, you just have to trust that they know the best science on human health and disease, and there's certainly nothing questionable in that concoction, no ingredients you need to be concerned about, or no just medical perspective that is flawed. Their science is the true science, perfect and free of any error, and certainly not being used deceptively for their own advantage. Continuing with Dr. King, man must be a dutiful servant to the omnipotent state. Right? quote-unquote omnipotent, right? This is the communist view, basically, that the state is omnipotent, state is God. All of this is contrary not only to the Christian doctrine of God, but also to the Christian estimate of man. Christianity insists that man is an end because he is a child of God, made in God's image. Man is more than a producing animal guided by economic forces. He is a being of spirit, crowned with glory and honor, endowed with the gift of freedom. The ultimate weakness of communism is that it robs man of that quality which makes him man. Clearly then, all of this is out of harmony with the Christian view of things. We must not fool ourselves. These systems of thought are too contradictory to be reconciled. They represent diametrically opposed ways of looking at the world and of transforming it. The theory, though surely not the practice, of communism challenges us to be more concerned about social justice. With all of its false assumptions and evil methods, communism arose as a protest against the injustices and indignities inflicted upon the underprivileged. The Communist Manifesto was written by men aflame with a passion for social justice. Karl Marx, born of Jewish parents who both came from rabbinic stock and trained, as he must have been, in the Hebrew scriptures, could never forget the words of Amos, quote, "Let judgment roll down as waters, and righteousness as a mighty stream," end quote. Marx's parents adopted Christianity when he was a child of 6, thus adding to the Old Testament heritage that of the New. In spite of his later atheism and anti-ecclesiasticism, Marx could not quite forget Jesus' concern for, quote, "the least of these," end quote. In his writings, he champions the cause of the poor, the exploited, and the disinherited. I just want to make a quick comment here. There's something to keep in mind that although some may adopt communism and promote communism because of a sincere interest in helping those that are exploited and victims of injustice, that's not always the case. Communism can be pushed on a society deceptively by claiming that it's here to help the disenfranchised, here to help the exploited, here to battle injustice, right? Here to help end oppression of various sorts. But they're really just using that as a vehicle to increase state power. And the way you can see that, if you look deeply, is recognizing that the solution they offer to all of these injustices is always the same. It's always more state power, right? Which is what they're interested in. And after they gain that power, the people that they were supposedly so concerned about are often discarded as the quote-unquote useful idiots. Okay, continuing with Dr. King. Communism in theory emphasizes a classless society. Although the world knows from sad experience that communism has created new classes and a new lexicon of injustice, in its theoretical formation, it envisages a world society transcending the superficialities of race and color, class and caste. Membership in the Communist Party theoretically is not determined by the color of a man's skin or the quality of blood in his veins. Christians are bound to recognize any passionate concern for social justice. Such concern is basic in the Christian doctrine of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. The Gospels abound with expressions of concern for the welfare of the poor. Listen to the words of the Magnificat. Quote, "He hath put down the mighty from their seats, and exalted them of low degree. He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent empty away." End quote. No doctrinaire communist ever expressed a passion for the poor, and oppressed such as we find in the Manifesto of Jesus, which affirms, quote, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." End quote. Christians are also bound to recognize the ideal of a world unity in which all barriers of caste and color are abolished. Christianity repudiates racism. The broad universalism standing at the center of the gospel makes both the theory and practice of racial injustice morally unjustifiable. Racial prejudice is a blatant denial of the unity which we have in Christ. For in Christ there is neither Jew nor Gentile, bond nor free, Negro nor white. In spite of the noble affirmations of Christianity, the Church has often lagged in its concern for social justice, and too often has been content to mouth pious irrelevances and sanctimonious trivialities. It has often been so absorbed in a future good, quote, over yonder, end quote, that it forgets the present evils, quote, down here, end quote. Yet the Church is challenged to make the gospel of Jesus Christ relevant within the social situation. We must come to see the Christian gospel is a two-way road. On the one side, it seeks to change the souls of men and thereby unite them with God. On the other, it seeks to change the environmental conditions of men so that the soul will have a chance after it is changed. Any religion that professes to be concerned with the souls of men and yet is not concerned with the economic and social conditions that strangle them and the social conditions that cripple them is the kind that Marxist describes as, quote, an opiate of the people, end quote. Our greatest defense against communism is to take offensive action in behalf of justice and righteousness. After our condemnation of the philosophy of communism has been eloquently expressed, we must, with positive action, seek to remove those conditions of poverty, insecurity, injustice, and racial discrimination, which are the fertile soil in which the seed of communism grows and develops. Communism thrives only when the doors of opportunity are closed and human aspirations are stifled, end quote. So that concludes my reading from Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, Strength to Love. And just a final comment on that final passage about communism thriving when the doors of opportunity are closed and human aspirations are stifled, that should ring a bell as far as literally the doors of small businesses being closed due to these restrictions, which are supposedly being done for the greater good, right, to keep everyone safe. But these restrictions are disastrous, as any abusive measure would be, right? You can't achieve good ends through evil means. And controlling people's lives, committing preemptive attack against them, saying, we're going to shut down your business, your means of livelihood, because we think it would be beneficial to the greater good, based on our so-called science and our so-called expertise and so-called authority, we're going to make this judgment call that here abuse is acceptable, and in fact it is never acceptable. And when this plays out and people are put in more of a dire situation economically, they then will come with the next solution to the problem which they created, which is more government control, right? And here we have talk of things like universal basic income as a solution. But of course, what comes with that universal basic income is further control of you economically, personally, medically, right? This is similar to how the IMF operates, where it comes into a country and says, oh, okay, we'll give you this giant loan, but here are all these changes you have to make in your society. Here are all these restrictions that you're going to have to implement in order to receive the solution that we're offering. So keep that in mind as, the government comes in to supposedly save us from this unfortunate economic situation, which in fact they designed and implemented from the beginning, right? You have to be open to the possibility that this was actually planned out in Hegelian dialectic fashion, wherein they either create, exaggerate, or manufacture a problem, wait for the reaction, which is people saying, hey, I can't afford to pay for basic expenses anymore, and then them coming in with the so-called solution, which is, okay, well, we're going to do the moral thing here. We're going to take our role as protector and provider of the population, and we're going to institute these new economic policies, which, just so happen to reduce your freedom even more and make you even more dependent on us. So it's an abusive tactic, it's an abusive relationship, like you can find in relationships where an individual is subject to narcissistic abuse, right? There's deception and manipulation and appeal to emotion, all for the end goal of the narcissist, or in this case, the institutional narcissist being the state, gaining more control over you. That's always the end goal. And like I said, that's how you can always tell that this is actually a form of cultural Marxism and not, true righteousness occurring, is that the solution they offer is always the same. Less freedom for you, more power for them. More disempowerment for you, while more power for them. That's always the purpose of propaganda. That's always the purpose of these deceptive agendas. So I hope you found this reading of Martin Luther King Jr. Very insightful, as I did, and that you recognize how relevant it is to current events. And you can utilize these insights in speaking out against this current wave of global communism and medical tyranny in particular that has been occurring. All right, thank you for listening.